On a certain day, I received a letter from a private soldier named Gratmar, attached to the garrison of San Francisco. I had known him but slightly, the acquaintance having come about through his interest in some stories which I had published, and which he had a way of calling psychological studies. He was a dreamy, romantic, fine-grained lad, proud as a tiger lily and sensitive as a bluebell. What mad caprice led him to join the army I never knew, but I did know that there he was wretchedly out of place, and I foresaw that his rude and repellent environment would make of him in time a deserter, or a suicide, or a murderer. The letter at first seemed a wild outpouring of despair, for it informed me that before it should reach me its author would be dead by his own hand. But when I had read farther, I understood its spirit, and realized how coolly formed a scheme it disclosed, and how terrible its purport was intended to be. The worst of the contents was the information that a certain officer, whom he named, had driven him to the deed, and that he was committing suicide for the sole purpose of gaining thereby the power to revenge himself upon his enemy. I learned afterward that the officer had received a similar letter. This was so puzzling that I sat down to reflect upon the young man's peculiarities. He had always seemed somewhat uncanny, and had I proved more sympathetic, he doubtless would have gone farther and told me of certain problems which he professed to have solved concerning the life beyond this. One thing that he had said came back vividly. If I could only overcome that purely gross and animal love of life that makes us all shun death, I would kill myself, for I know how far more powerful I could be in spirit than in flesh. The manner of the suicide was startling, and that was what might have been expected from this odd character. Evidently scorning the flummery of funerals, he had gone into a little canyon near the military reservation and blown himself into 1,000,000 fragments with dynamite, so that all of him that was ever found was some minute particles of flesh and bone. I kept the letter a secret, for I desired to observe the officer without rousing his suspicion of my purpose. It would be an admirable test of a dead man's power and deliberate intention to haunt the living, for so I interpreted the letter. The officer thus to be punished was an oldish man, short, apoplectic, overbearing, and irascible. Generally he was kind to most of the men in a way, but he was gross and mean, and that explained sufficiently his harsh treatment of young Gratmar, whom he could not understand, and his efforts to break that flighty young man's spirit. Not very long after the suicide, certain modifications in the officer's conduct became apparent to my watchful oversight. His choler, though nonetheless sporadic, developed a quality which had some of the characteristics of senility, and yet he was still in his prime, and passed for a sound man. He was a bachelor, and had lived always alone, but presently he began to shirk solitude at night and courted in daylight. His brother officers chaffed him, and thereupon he would laugh in rather a forced and silly fashion, quite different from the ordinary way with him, and would sometimes, on these occasions, blush so violently that his face would become almost purple. His soldierly alertness and sternness relaxed surprisingly at some times, and at others were exaggerated into unnecessary acerbity, his conduct in this regard suggesting that of a drunken man who knows that he is drunk and who now and then makes a brave effort to appear sober. All these things and more, indicating some mental strain or some dreadful apprehension, or perhaps something worse than either, were observed partly by me, and partly by an intelligent officer whose watch upon the man had been secured by me. To be more particular, the afflicted man was observed often to start suddenly and in alarm, look quickly around, and make some unintelligent monosyllabic answer, seemingly to an inaudible question that no visible person had asked. He acquired the reputation, too, of having taken lately to nightmares, for in the middle of the night he would shriek in the most dreadful fashion, alarming his roommates prodigiously. After these attacks he would sit up in bed, his ruddy face devoid of color, his eyes glassy and shining, his breathing broken with gasps and his body wet with a cold perspiration. Knowledge of these developments and transformations spread throughout the garrison, but the few, mostly women, who dared to express sympathy or suggest a tonic encountered so violent rebuffs that they blessed heaven for escaping alive from his word volleys. Even the garrison surgeon, who had a kindly manner, and the commanding general, who was constructed on dignified and impressive lines, received little thanks for their solicitude. Clearly, the doughty old officer, who had fought like a bulldog in 2 wars and 100 battles, was suffering deeply from some undiscoverable malady. The next extraordinary thing which he did was to visit one evening, not so clandestinely as to escape my watch, a spirit medium, extraordinary, because he always had scoffed at the idea of spirit communications. I saw him as he was leaving the medium's rooms. His face was purple, his eyes were bulging and terrified, and he tottered in his walk. A policeman, seeing his distress, advanced to assist him, whereupon the soldier hoarsely begged, "Call a hack." Into it he fell, and asked to be driven to his quarters. I hastily ascended to the medium's rooms and found her lying unconscious on the floor. Soon, with my aid, she recalled her wits, but her conscious state was even more alarming than the other. At first, she regarded me with terror and cried, "It is horrible for you to hound him so." I assured her that I was hounding no one. "Oh, I thought you were the spire. Oh, but it was standing exactly where you are," she exclaimed. "I suppose so," I agreed, "but you can see that I am not the young man's spirit. However, I am familiar with this whole case, madam, and if I can be of any service in the matter, I should be glad if you..."